I've only had Arlo for a day and a half, but if anything happened to him, I would kill everyone in this room and then myself.
Well, time for my first major video of the new decade, and instead of doing something to celebrate this momentous occasion, I'm just doing what I usually do and reviewing a 3D platformer. If you expected any different, you clearly don't know me well enough. So this game here that I'm covering today is a bit of an interesting case. To get right into a quick history lesson, this all started with a little indie platformer released on the Oculus Rift in 2016, simply known as Lucky's Tale. It introduced the idea of a classic 90s style 3D platformer with a VR controlled camera, an idea further fleshed out by games like Astrobot Rescue Mission. In 2017, a non-VR sequel was released as an Xbox One exclusive, known as Super Lucky's Tale. It was viewed as pretty standard platformer fare, and ended up getting pretty mixed reviews all around, with some noting that a game like this, being Xbox One exclusive, probably isn't going to do itself any favors. Not to stereotype or anything, but most Xbox One players probably didn't get one to play 3D platformers. Fortunately, it seems the development team, Playful Studios, took that to heart, and 2 years later we got new Super Lucky's Tale, revealed at E3 2019 as a Nintendo Switch exclusive, which also means I finally get to talk about a game on this beautiful piece of hardware. Seriously, I freaking love the Switch. Now at face level, it may seem like New Super Lucky's Tale is just a port of, well, Super Lucky's Tale. But believe it or not, the new in the title is there for a reason. Instead of just straight porting the original game, Playful Studios went out of their way to essentially revitalize the game in several aspects. The storylines changed, gameplay elements have been updated, and many levels have been completely redesigned, to name a few examples. Now that said, I haven't played the original Super Lucky's Tale myself, so I won't be comparing the versions during this review from here on. We'll be looking at New Super Lucky's Tale as a standalone game. So with that said, let's take a look at this indie 3D platformer, because I'm very quickly becoming a 3D platformer YouTuber despite my channel's Final Fantasy motif. Whoops. So how does this adorably charming looking game start off?
It started with the destruction of our home.
Beg your pardon, what? Yeah, despite its cutesy look, New Super Lucky's Tale starts with this surprisingly dark cinematic about how the sorcerer Jinx, once a member of the fabled Guardian Order, betrayed the other Guardians, destroying their headquarters and banishing most of the Guardians in an attempt to steal the Book of Ages, a magical artifact containing entire parallel worlds. The last few Guardians, which includes a fox named Lyra Swifttail, go on the run with the book to protect her from Jinx, with Lyra bringing her younger brother Lucky with her. After years in hiding, Jinx and his team of children, the Kitty Litter, yes that is actually what they're called, catch up to the Guardians and try to take the book, but the book ends up creating a massive portal, scattering its pages, as well as trapping Jinx, the Kitty Litter, and Lucky in the worlds within. So now it's up to Lucky, with the Book of Ages in hand, to travel through the book's many worlds and find the lost pages before Jinx and the Kitty Litter can.
This is Lucky's Tale.
Huh, I guess the box lied to me. So yeah, the opening's quite a bit more intense than I thought it'd be. Though funny enough, this darker tone is not at all carried over into the game itself. It definitely has more of that playful, no pun intended, feel that the front of the box paints. That said, the opening's not excessively dark, so it doesn't feel like a jarring tonal shift when the game actually starts. If anything, this opening really helped in getting me engaged in what I was about to partake in. Besides, 3D platformers in the 90s had stuff like torturous animal mutation and plots of dragon baby genocide, so this is all pretty tame in comparison. And much like many 3D platformers in the 90s, that's where most of the story stuff kinda stops. You do get to interact with Jinx and the Kitty Litter throughout the game, and there is a bit of a post-game subplot with Lucky going through the trials needed to join the Guardian Order, but there's very little story stuff going on beyond that. That said, you do get plenty of lore in the loading screens, such as details on what may have caused Jinx's descent into power hunger, and even tidbits about how Lucky and Lyra have an older brother in the Guardian Order who was among those banished by Jinx, but those only really serve as flavor text. Still, it's nice to have. So with all that said, let's get talking about the gameplay. As I've made note of multiple times already, New Super Lucky's Tale is a 3D platformer heavily inspired by the classics from the 90s. But instead of basing itself off one specific title, it takes inspiration from several games in the genre. A little bit of Mario 64, a little bit of Crash Bandicoot, a little bit of Banjo-Kazooie, a little bit of Spyro, you get the idea. The good thing is, the game doesn't fall into the same pitfall that nostalgic callback kind of games often do, as even with all this inspiration, the game still has a clear identity of its own, but we'll go more into that later. The game works off a hub world system, with 5 main worlds and a bonus world for the post-game. The main worlds contain portals to the various levels, which all have a number of magic pages to collect to unlock that world's boss fight. Every world's levels are available right from the get-go, allowing you to do them in whichever order you like. The only exception to this is the 5th world, which has you going through the levels in a linear fashion, but given it's the last world of the game, that's understandable. Like most collectathon platformers, you only need a select number of pages to unlock the boss fight, rather than all of them, allowing you to skip levels or objectives you might be struggling with or just don't want to do. It also helps that the page number needed to unlock boss fights is consistently pretty low, so you don't have to get a ton of pages to progress. The objectives are pretty streamlined compared to most collectathons though. Every level has 4 pages, one gained from completing the level's main objective, one from collecting at least 300 coins, one from finding all the letters in Lucky's name scattered throughout the level, and one from a secondary objective, which is usually something like a side quest or a secret puzzle room. Now despite this more streamlined way of getting the pages, compared to the variety of tasks collectathons often give you, the game doesn't feel at all repetitive, and that's because its variety comes from the levels themselves. New Super Lucky's Tale has a few different types of levels that it likes to juggle around, namely explorative 3D areas, traditional side-scrolling platform levels, and these auto-runner challenges kinda reminiscent of the minecart levels from Donkey Kong Country, just without the minecart. I really enjoy having this variety of level types, rather than all of them being just explorative 3D areas, and it also helps that the levels themselves are so varied, even within the same worlds. For example, one side-scrolling level in the Restful Retreat world has you climbing up a mountain, while another has you running and jumping across giant watermelons. Or in the Veggie Village world, one explorative level has you shrinking down mutated chickens, and another has you looking for members of a country band so they can perform at a festival. These are just a few examples, but the point is, each level very much has its own identity, making all of them fun in their own way. It also helps that they're really fun to traverse, which with that said, let's get talking about this little guy. First and foremost, Lucky is utterly adorable. He's filled to the brim with a precious sense of wonder and curiosity, and he's almost always got a smile on his face. I'm a sucker for wholesome characters like this, so Lucky won me over real quick. And hey, as a player character, he's a lot of fun to use too. He actually doesn't have a ton to his moveset. He's got the traditional jump and double jump, a tail swipe attack that can be used in midair, a dive attack, a ground pound, and this really neat burrowing ability. It allows him to move underground to dig up buried objects or go under certain walls. You're able to dive into the burrow, which can also be done almost immediately after jumping out of burrowing, allowing you to string together an endless dive and burrow combo. It's honestly pretty satisfying to do. Granted, you can't burrow into every surface, but if you try to burrow where you can't, Lucky instead skids on the ground, which, if done after a dive, is a really good way to build up momentum. On top of that, a really fun thing to do with enemies, which most take 2 hits to take out, just to clarify, is to jump out of a burrow right underneath them, and then, while they're stunned in midair, do a midair tailspin attack to take them out. That honestly never got old to pull off. Lucky's move pool may be simple, but the way everything works off each other makes him really fun to control. Oh, and to add to Lucky's cuteness factor, there's a ton of costumes you can buy with your coins after unlocking them from collecting enough pages. I end up giving him this general's uniform for majority of my playthrough. I don't know, I thought it looked cute on him. Now, on the topic of collecting pages, there is one other way to get pages aside from the main level's objectives, and that's through these mini puzzle levels. Each hub world has anywhere between 2 to 6 of these, and they come in 2 varieties. One type is these ball-rolling labyrinth puzzles done by Tess, a member of the kitty litter, for her personal research. These puzzles are alright, though they can be a bit finicky to control. You tilt the board directly, with physics directing where Lucky goes, and sometimes physics likes to make the ball roll a bit further than you may have planned on it going. Again, these puzzles aren't bad, just a teeny bit wonky. The other type of puzzle you have is these statue pushing puzzles done by a rock golem you meet in the Sky Castle world. And if you recall what I said about these types of puzzles back in my Skylar and Plux review, and instantly we're introduced to a sliding piece puzzle. Yeah, not a big fan of these. That said, they're honestly not that bad in this game. For the most part. Some of the ones in the later worlds get a bit frustrating to figure out the solution to, and 1 or 2 of them I admittedly looked up a walkthrough to figure them out. Don't get me wrong, they're definitely well designed, and if you're into these types of puzzles, you'll probably have a lot of fun with them. This here is more so a me problem rather than the game's problem. Now that we've gone over the many ways to unlock the boss fights, let's talk about the boss fights themselves, shall we? Like I said earlier, each main world ends with a boss fight, having you go up against members of the kitty litter before taking on Jinx himself in the final world. I will say, I love Jinx and the kitty litter as characters. They've all got pretty distinct personalities, and they're just really fun villains. On top of that, they actually get directly involved in some of the levels before you take on them, so even before you go to fight them, you get more of a taste of what they're like, which I think is a wonderful touch. That said, the boss fights themselves are admittedly one of the game's weaker parts. Not to say they're bad, they're just okay overall. More often than not, the attack patterns are simple and pretty easy to avoid, and they often give you a lot of hearts, so dying during these boss fights isn't very common, if at all. Not to say there's a problem with a boss fight being easy, but they just feel underwhelming is the thing. I will note, the final battle against Jinx does have more going on in it, but I'd still say it was just alright, nothing too special. However, while the boss lineup overall is just okay, there is one boss in this game that actually takes those extra steps to be an absolute highlight. And of all the bosses to hold this title, which keep in mind include a martial artist, an inventor, a war general, and a sorcerer, it's the pop star who gets it. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that either, but Lady Meowmalade, I know, what a name, absolutely has the best boss fight in the game. It's creative in design, it actually gets pretty tough by the end, her theme is catchy, which, yes, she gets her own unique boss theme. I was honestly surprised at just how much fun her boss fight was. I was not expecting it to be that solid. Though on the topic of music, I want to get into the technical stuff now, starting with the audio. While not having a ton of earworms per se, the soundtrack overall is quite solid. The pieces are atmospheric and fit the parts they're put into quite perfectly. Beyond Lady Meowmalade's theme, there are some other songs in the game I do remember quite liking. There's the theme of the opening level, with a fun, cheerful bounciness to it that helps get the player into the adventure they're about to go on. There's the song for the train level near the end of the game, which has a pretty charming, spooky feel to it to fit with the level. And oddly enough, the slide puzzle music, which is beautiful and actually kind of relaxing to listen to. As for voice acting, they kind of take an interesting direction with it. For the hand-drawn cinematics and a select few in-game cutscenes, they use full-on voice acting for the dialogue, but everywhere else in the game, they go the Banjo-Kazooie ukulele route and use gibberish sounds. Though instead of sounding like how those games do it, they oddly sound more like they're talking in the Sims language.
Lines, Herbal Chew, Meowsome.
Floppin' jibs, Twakin' Durble Ermish. Go! It's Prop Day!
Honestly though, I'm kinda okay with that. It gives each character more of a variety of sounds, so it doesn't get too repetitive or annoying. Not to say that's necessarily the case with Banjo-Kazooie or Yooka-Laylee, but admittedly some of the voices in those games do get irritating to hear after enough times. Moving on to visuals. Yeah, this game's really nice looking. Not necessarily jaw-droppingly beautiful, but there's a lot of life and color to every area, even the darker ones, and the character designs are equally lively and charming. Now I will say, if there's one area technically where the game does lose a few points, it's the frame rate. The game runs at a native 30 frames per second, but there's many points in the game where it does start to dip. Fortunately, it's never to a point that it interferes with your ability to play, but it is visually noticeable. Though that said, and I do feel like this should be brought up since this is a Switch game, the differences in visuals and performance between playing it with your Switch docked or portably are little to none. So regardless of how you play it, you get the same experience in that regard. Now after you beat Jinx and get the normal ending, your adventure's not done just yet. You unlock the bonus hub world, that being Lucky and Lyra's home of Foxington, where instead of ordinary levels to collect pages, you have a gauntlet of challenges from the remaining Guardians to test Lucky and see if he's got what it takes to be a Guardian himself. Now on a quick side note, something I did forget to mention about the game as a whole is that, while it's incredibly fun, it is overall quite easy. Not necessarily a bad thing, but if you're looking for a tough challenge in 3D platforming, you're not gonna get it with this game. Until these Guardian challenges. I wouldn't say they're necessarily a difficulty spike, but the platforming challenges especially are genuinely, well, challenging, and all in different unique ways. One of them tests maneuvering with the burrow, while another tests quick thinking, just to name a few examples. And all these levels are portrayed with, of all things, a vaporware-like aesthetic. Between this and Electron Avenue and CTR, I'm sensing a resurgence to this visual style in video games, and I'm okay with that. That said, I do feel like the other Guardian challenges are a bit weaker than the platforming ones. You get more ball-rolling puzzles, which definitely have more to them than before, which is nice, but controlling the board in these is still a bit finicky. Still, they made for fun challenges. And lastly, you get combat challenges, which consist of harder variations of 2 of the bosses and an enemy rush gauntlet. Again, fun challenges, but I do find it odd that they only had you refight 2 of the bosses, rather than, at the very least, all the kitty litter. And once you finished all the challenges, you get the true ending, where Lucky officially joins the Guardian Order, and Jinx and the kitty litter are freed from imprisonment by...
Hey Jinx, it's been a while. Need a ride?
And even tidbits about how Lucky and Lyra have an older brother in the Guardian Order who was among those banished by Jinx. If that's not a sequel setup, I don't know what is. Now with all that said, there's one other element of this game I haven't really spoken about yet that I love about it. And it ties back to what I've been saying earlier about this game having its own identity. The main thing that really makes it stand out in the 3D platforming space is without a doubt, its charm. I already went into how Lucky is utterly precious and how I'd adopt him as my son if I could, but the game overall has that same level of wholesome energy to it. And it's a big reason to why I got so attached to this game. A great example is the first NPC you meet, Greg the Mail Golem. He serves as your guide throughout the game and gives you tips and lore bits on the loading screens, but sometimes he'll just give these remarks about how he values Lucky as a friend. It's kinda precious. Veggie Village is another great example. It's inhabited by what can only be described as redneck worms, which is frankly both adorable and hilarious, and some of these worms are part of a previously mentioned country band called the Soggy Boggy Boys. They even sing a song with proper words when you've reunited them all. Veggie Village also has this one level where you're trying to save these bunnies so they can help the Bunny King overthrow the Garlic King. I love the scenarios in this game. And one of the bunnies you save just starts giving some genuinely good life advice. It's kind of incredible. Heck, even Jinx has some charm to him. You can find him hidden away in the first 4 worlds hubs in the form of a rock golem. And while he'll initially be all ominous and whatnot, talk to him again and he'll start gushing about the child of his you'll be facing in that world. He even tries to figure out how social media works so he can give Lady Meowmalade some words of encouragement about her next performance. Not gonna lie, there's something oddly adorable about this tyrannical power-mad sorcerer also being a genuinely caring father. Probably my favorite part of the whole game though, both in regard to charm and gameplay, is the level Carnival Court. It's the first level of the final world, and it's a carnival run by these little ghosty guys. There's a ton of carnival games to play in this level, with each one actually taking quite a bit of advantage of your abilities, making for a really unique and incredibly fun level. But on top of that, the level's oozing with personality. From the carnival setting to the silly puns the ghost NPCs say, or my personal favorite part, the side quest where you have to get a teddy bear for this ghost child so he can give it to his hardworking mom as a gift of appreciation. And yes, this is part of how you get the level secret page, but this little bit was still utterly heartwarming. The game in general constantly made sure I had a smile on my face, and I loved every single moment of it. So yeah, that was a pleasant way to start off my decade game-wise. New Super Lucky's Tale may be on the simple and easy side, but with the amount of massive open world and heavy story-driven games we have on the market right now, having something simpler is honestly kind of refreshing. It's no secret that I love me some 3D platformers, and this game did a great job with scratching that itch. It uses its systems to the fullest with some creative and fun level design, all while being adorably charming throughout. It also helps that it's relatively short. The playthrough I recorded, which wasn't a 100% playthrough, only took me about 7.5 hours to do, and given I did that and my initial playthrough in the span of a single week and still loved it by the end of it all, I get the feeling I'm gonna end up coming back to this one many times in the future. If you're a Switch owner and want a 3D platformer that's short, sweet, and simple, or want to play something that's not Mario Odyssey or Hat in Time, this is a definite recommendation from me. This has been Black Mage Maverick, and until the next video, have a nice day, everybody.